The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Alberto Fernández, President of the Argentine Republic. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome His Excellency Alberto Fernández, President of the Argentine Republic, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon. Mr. President, the world is experiencing a time of change. A new era is upon us as humankind is still overcoming the effects of a pandemic that led to the loss of lives of 15 million people, leaving us exposed to the inequality that we're confronted. In the meantime, the climate crisis has subjected our planet to all kinds of extreme events. Cyclones, tornadoes, unexpected flooding, or extensive droughts have affected millions of human beings in every corner of the globe. All this is taking place while a war is continuing, carrying away human lives and unleashing an energy and food crisis of unheard of proportions. As all these calamities are occurring, we are witnessing an astounding technological revolution. The robotization and the acceleration of the process of incorporating artificial intelligence forces us to rethink our education, processes of production, and the preservation of work. How we will be capable of confronting these changes and harmonizing interests in this new landscape in which we have found ourselves, that is the true challenge that we are confronting today. As I speak before this assembly, I confess that I feel duty-bound to be absolutely frank with you. The problems of the world demand solutions. We have spent too much time diagnosing problems. We cannot continue speaking of these while we're teetering on a ledge. The risks of perpetuating this current situation are very high. We have covered half the path towards the implementation of the 2030 agenda, and yet we know, as ECLAC mentions, that only 1/4 of the targets that we have set for ourselves will be achieved by 2030. This inability to behold a better future sows unease in the developing world, where the poorest and the most vulnerable people live. It is impossible to want to achieve an equitable future by promoting and continuing the same paradigms that have generated inequality in which we live. International financial engineering has demonstrated that it is abusive and it is unchanged. How can we achieve sustainable development without financing that contributes to this? The international financial system has not demonstrated a determination to adapt itself to a world that wants to restore a lost equality. Quite to the contrary, it only seeks to impose the same orthodox policies that have deepened inequality and misery around the world. The global financial architecture only serves to concentrate income in the hands of the few and to marginalize vast regions of the world. It embraces speculative activity rather than development. It promotes cheap labor rather than dignifying labor. The time for words is over. The time has come to promote social justice in the world. The International Monetary Fund cannot continue increasing its interest rates each time that the U.S. Federal Reserve increases its rates to contain national inflation. It cannot continue to do this, and yet it does so. And in this context, it is shameful that even today, IMF applies surcharges to many countries who are already burdened by the unbearable weight of external debt. Ironically, the IMF finances Ukraine in the midst of its war, And in the midst of this war, it applies surcharges on interest that Ukraine is charged. It's shameful. We need a new framework for dealing with sovereign debt, which is guided by the development of social justice. Experience shows that when a people is choked with the eternal noose of indebtedness, its forces flag. Social crises are compounded and debts become unpayable. We face the challenge of feeding a growing global population in the midst of extreme climate conditions, droughts, flooding, tornadoes, hail. Everything affects the production and delivery of foodstuffs. We know this from our own experience. Argentina lost over 20% of its exports due to the worst drought of the past 100 years. No less than 3% of GDP were wiped out. We all know today that the global market of foodstuffs has been poisoned by financial speculation, and it only leads to greater income for the few and instability and misery for millions of human beings. To find a long-term solution to the problem of food security, it is essential that there is a system of international commerce of agricultural products that is more fair, more transparent, more equitable, and more predictable. We need to eliminate distortions produced by subsidies, and we need to prohibit foodstuffs from being an object of financial speculation. Both of these things discourage the necessary investments in order to increase production that will help satisfy the growing global demand for foodstuffs. Argentina considers multilateralism as the best tool to find shared solutions to shared problems. It reflects our mission to be guided by solidarity and to cooperate in the striving for collective well-being. Hegemonic agendas have only served to promote distrust, encourage arms races, and limit the possibilities for economic and scientific technological cooperation. In the current context, as we know, there is a confluence that has been provoked by over a decade of accumulated crises, starting from the effects of the financial collapse of 2008 up to the war unleashed by Russia in occupying Ukrainian territory. The effects of this war are there in plain sight. In addition to the terrible humanitarian consequences, the military conflict is generating historic levels of inflation around the world, but with particular impact on the prices of foodstuffs and energy. This situation has also given rise to other tensions less noticed by public opinion, but that also profoundly affect international peace. Just as an example, I'd like to highlight the blockades by Azerbaijan in the Lachin corridor, which have provoked a humanitarian crisis, which once again is punishing the Armenian people. Just today, while this assembly is being held, in the news we read that Azerbaijan has started military operations with the goal of taking control of Nagorno-Karabakh. The international community cannot remain indifferent to this reality. It must act preventively to avoid new ethnic, racial, religious, or political persecution. As we've always done, we will continue demanding of the parties to conflicts that they show wisdom and convene peace negotiations and demand multilateral organizations to regain the strength that they seem to have lost, the strength to uphold international rules. The countries of the global south, we have historically shared our visions about the international system and on the responsibility incumbent on multilateral organizations in the area of development, peace, global security, cooperation, and decolonization. I represent a country that this year will celebrate our 40th anniversary of restoration of democracy, a country that learned from its historic past that It will never again accept violations of human rights, and a country that has promoted as a policy of state the right to memory, to truth, and to justice. We are proud that of these 4 decades of uninterrupted democracy, during which the promotion and protection of human rights have been a fundamental path of the road that we have traveled. Today, UNESCO declared a World Heritage Site the Museum of Remembrance, ESMA, which was a clandestine center of detention, torture, and extermination, in which the dictatorship perpetrated its worst atrocities. By actively preserving memory that the deniers want to conceal, we will make sure that this pain will never again be repeated. In the face of these crimes against humanity, our solution is not revenge but justice. And precisely because we know the horror represented by the disappearance of 30,000 human beings, we have taken this opportunity to reiterate our appeal to adhere to the International Convention for the Protection of Persons Against Forced Disappearance. We need more states to be committed to this so that this crime is completely eradicated. The challenge that we have before us is to consolidate and move forward our efforts on the rights agenda, which means achieving democracies with greater equality among them and equality among its citizens. Human rights admit no kind of regression. If there's regression, those who gain are the advocates of authoritarianism and those who promote a hate discourse. Democracies lose legitimacy, and the crisis of representation that is generated winds up undermining the institutions of the rule of law. Preserving the rule of law is a shared conviction on our continent. This is why we're particularly concerned about what is taking place in Guatemala. The international community must activate the relevant mechanisms that ensure respect for the popular verdict. The climate crisis is a reality that has modified temperatures and atmospheric phenomena around the world, imposing restrictions and obstacles to development. It is therefore essential to resolve problems without delay by implementing an architecture of environmental financing, multilateral one that is just, transparent, equitable, and based on the principle of shared but differentiated responsibilities. Argentina reaffirms its commitment to gender equality and diversity as an essential condition for growth and sustainable development at the national and international level with a human rights approach. We have developed normative frameworks and public policies to promote the equality for all women and to promote diversity. Currently, our country is implementing a national plan of equality within diversity. As part of this integrationist mission embodied in Mercosur and UNASUR, in these 4 years, we have sought to return to the path of integration with Latin America and the Caribbean and strengthen our dialogue with our partners through political coordination based on solidarity and cooperation. As once was the case with the construction of the European Union, the various institutions of integration in Latin America and Caribbean represent a heritage that the region has shared with humankind in search of peace, cooperation, and justice. Our region currently faces a historical opportunity. We have the energy resources and food resources that the world demands. Our development depends on having the capability of taking advantage of these resources. It's important for us to work together in order to carry out infrastructure projects that allow our region's industry to compete. Argentina, Mr. President, condemns terrorism in all its forms and manifestations. These actions constitute a threat to peace and international security and to human dignity. Terrorism must be combated in the framework of the rule of law and within the full respect of international law. Argentina has ratified this commitment with the Inter-American Convention Against Terrorism, and has ratified most of the international instruments in the area of terrorism, seeking to implement all the measures contained there as the most effective way to put an end to this threat. For our part, we will continue combating impunity, investigating attacks committed against us, as in 1992, against the Israeli embassy in Buenos Aires, and in 1994, the seat of Amia, Jewish Cultural Center, which took the lives of 107 persons and left hundreds wounded. We want the perpetrators of these horrific attacks to be identified, judged, and convicted. Once again, we urge the Islamic Republic of Iran to cooperate with the Argentinian judicial authorities to make progress in the investigation of the attack against Amia. We also urge the international community, all of it, to support us in our fight by not welcoming or protecting any of those involved, even when they enjoy diplomatic immunity. We must remind everyone that these individuals are subject to international arrest warrants and Interpol red notices. Argentina is firmly opposed, Mr. President, to the use of unilateral coercive measures and the adoption of discriminatory commercial practices. The continuation of the blockade against Cuba is unacceptable. Year after year, this General Assembly has demanded by an overwhelming majority the need to put an end to this blockade. Also, we would once again request that Cuba be taken off the list of countries that supposedly sponsor international terrorism. By the same token, the sanctions imposed by the United States against Venezuela must cease immediately. Their continuation has only worsened the living conditions for the inhabitants of Venezuela and led millions of Venezuelans to choose exile and emigrate from their country in search of a better life. I want to also reaffirm the legitimate and inalienable sovereignty rights of the Republic of Argentina on the Malvinas Islands, South Georgia, South Sandwich Islands, and the surrounding maritime areas. They are a part and parcel of national Argentinian territory, and they are illegally occupied by the United Kingdom have been for almost 2 centuries, in conformity with the resolutions of this General Assembly and its Special Decolonization Committee. The way to resolve the colonial situation of these islands is through negotiations on sovereignty between Argentina and the United Kingdom. We regret that the United Kingdom continues to refuse to resume negotiations. We regret that unilateral activities of exploration and development of natural resources have continued in the area under dispute, contravening Resolution 31/49 of this Assembly. We also question the military presence of the UK in the South Atlantic, which is a region of peace. Argentina maintains a firm commitment to a peaceful resolution of this anachronistic colonial situation. We have proposed to the United Kingdom a renewed bilateral agenda on the South Atlantic that implies a formal process of dialogue which includes, inter alia, the question related to the resumption of negotiations on sovereignty. We also have expressed our readiness to continue with the task of identifying the remains of ex-combatants in the framework of obligations deriving from international humanitarian law, and with a view to providing a response and solace to families of the soldiers who lost their lives. Unfortunately, the United Kingdom has rejected our proposal. Notwithstanding this, Argentina reiterates its request to the Secretary General that in the framework of his good office is that he redoubles his efforts to bring both parties together and bring them to the negotiating table. The motto of the 2030 Agenda is leave no one behind. May no one lose sight of the path towards justice and development. We are convinced that this is a noble goal that applies to individuals and applies to entire peoples. However, please let us not convert this phrase into an empty phrase, into a dead letter. If we do, remorse won't serve anything. It won't be able to repair the ruined lives, the lives without a future, or to return the lost lives. Thank you very much.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Argentine Republic for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency.